When Microsoft created the original Surface RT and subsequent Surface Pros, they ended up creating an entirely new product category that didn't exist before. And I would argue that product category is incredibly innovative. Now, what happens when you take that same innovative Surface team and task them with creating a more traditional laptop, and then iterating on that laptop design for several years? Well, then you get the Microsoft Surface Laptop 3. The Surface Laptop 3 has all of the boxes checked to be a completely premium device, but none of the true innovation that we've seen from Microsoft's hardware division over the past decade. But does that mean that Microsoft's Surface Laptop 3 shouldn't be the de facto device for Windows 10 lovers? Let's talk about it. This is NOISO, and this is the Microsoft Surface Laptop 3 review. In terms of design, the Surface Laptop 3 design is great, but maybe getting a little bit stale over the last couple of years. Now, I love the design of the Surface Laptop from the start, but a lot has changed since when it was released. Now we're seeing significantly smaller bezels on devices, smaller footprints, and a lot more manufacturers are switching to 16 by 10 aspect ratio displays. So Microsoft, despite having maybe that edge of having a more square display from the start, is no longer has that advantage. And this footprint is significantly larger than the footprint that you'd see on a lot of other 13-inch laptops, mostly because of the size of the bezels. I think when the original Surface Laptop released, the bezels were even a little bit large then, but now they're just almost comically large compared to most other devices on the market. While you might be able to excuse the larger bezels on the Surface Pro or Surface Go units, this doesn't make sense because I'm not grabbing the edges of the screen nearly as often. That being said, I still love the design of the Surface Laptop 3. Something about the utilitarian squareness to it and the wedge shape that not only you see from the back of the device to the front of the device, but also from the bottom to the top of the device, all feels very relatively Spartan but functional. And I prefer that over the more curvy designs that we've seen from a lot of other manufacturers recently. If I had my choice, I would probably go for a Surface Laptop 3. Not necessarily with a smaller footprint, because I think this footprint is completely small enough, but instead having a slightly larger screen that made the bezels quite a bit smaller. We might be able to get 14 or maybe even a little bit larger inches into this same footprint. And that for me would be the perfectly designed laptop. The only other downside that I see in this design is in some of the units, Microsoft has switched from the Alcantara fabric keyboard deck to more traditional metal or aluminum. And I think while visually this looks great, I think ergonomically the experience is a lot more similar to what I'd expect on a MacBook and not nearly as comfortable to rest my palms on. I really love the keyboard decks of old, and I really wish that I had gotten one of those units. The other downside is that some folks have been experiencing some problems with this metal keyboard deck where the rigidity actually ends up cracking the screen. Now, Microsoft usually will replace the screens from what I've seen on Reddit, but that is a little bit of a design issue with the metal keyboard deck. Now, that metal keyboard deck also contributes to the experience of typing on the keyboard. For me, I actually preferred the original Surface Laptop because the keys felt like they had a little bit more squishiness or give to them, whereas these keys have a little bit more clicky of a feel. And while I still think this is one of the better keyboards out on the market, it no longer has, for me, the crown of the best keyboard typing experience. Now, I love the layout of the keyboard deck, and this is one of my favorites. And generally, I still love typing on this, but I just wish that Microsoft still had the squishiness of the Alcantara fabric, and I would choose that over this. Move down to the trackpad, and you've got a very similar trackpad to what was on the original Surface Laptop, which is to say absolutely excellent and still one of the most consistent and best Windows trackpads on the market. I have no problems with this trackpad. Not only is it large enough for my use, but it also has a pretty well distributed click that's not significantly harder to click on the upper portion versus the bottom portion. Where Microsoft seems to be falling behind a little bit is in connectivity. Now, I really appreciate the fact that this device still has a traditional USB-A port on the side, which I really think should still be standard in most laptops, especially because we don't need to get much thinner than this. But it only has a single USB-C, which should be fine, but it doesn't have Thunderbolt compatibility, which limits kind of the longevity of it and means that you cannot connect this device to an external graphics card. And since this device doesn't have any sort of dedicated graphics, again, it limits the ability for you to do better and bigger things on something like this. Now, there is still the Surface Connect port, which in my mind is getting a little bit outdated. I'm sure there are a lot of people that really appreciate the magnetic experience and really think this is a great alternative for the folks that miss MagSafe, the traditional MagSafe on Apple MacBooks. But for me, I really preferred having a universal port that works with all my laptops. And so having a proprietary Surface Connect port is just not great for me. In terms of performance, this sports a Core i5 10th generation processor, 8 gigs of RAM, and 256 gigs of upgradable storage. That last point is absolutely incredible because prior Microsoft Surface laptops or Surface devices have not been upgradable. And I'm thankful that Microsoft, through the Surface Pro X, the new Surface Pro 7 Plus, and this device and the Surface Laptop Go are starting to move towards user upgradable storage. Now, for the most part, that's still not super user upgradable. It's not the type of thing that you just pop open the back and slide in a new SSD like the Surface Pro X, but it is a huge improvement, and I'm glad that Microsoft is moving in this direction where other manufacturers are not. Now, the specs on this device are pretty middle of the road or more traditional for a laptop of this era. Now that we're moving on to Intel's 11th gen and AMD's 5th gen, it's likely, or 5000 series, it's likely that most modern laptops from last year will probably torch the performance of the Surface Laptop 3. In practice, for me, that doesn't mean that much because this laptop is still incredibly quick and easy to do most of the stuff that I do on a daily basis. When I start to throw harder things at it, like photo editing, it starts to slow down. And it really shows that this device is not quite as powerful as a lot of more modern devices, or for example, the MacBook Air with M1, the M1 chip. In terms of battery life, I wouldn't describe this as a champ. I was still getting around 8 to 10 hours of work out of it consistently when I didn't put it on a charger or in a docking station, but it's not going to be nearly as consistent as the M1 MacBook Airs or MacBook Pros at getting a long life out of it. But for me, that should be enough. Now, I don't think that means that you should just pass up this device in favor of a newer device. If you are instead just using this device for more traditional computing, web browsing, office work, emails, or anything like that, this will still be a very compelling option. Because what I've seen with Microsoft Surface devices is they tend to have a lot longer shelf lives than most other Windows devices, and they tend to retain their value for a lot longer. There's a lot more parity to MacBooks here. Not quite at the same level, but it's closer. And that leads me to my conclusion. Now, rumor is that the Surface Laptop 4 should be announced soon, which I'm personally really excited for. The Surface Laptop 3 has become my de facto laptop for when I don't want to use my M1 MacBook Air, which is quite often. Now, frankly, I am a little bit disappointed that they haven't really gone anywhere relative to my experience with the Surface Laptop 1. And I miss the Alcantara keyboard deck, and I don't really think this has really moved that much since the original Surface laptop. I think spec bumps are great. I'm glad that it has been increasingly better performance, or getting increasingly better performance, but I think we need a real redesign or at least some significant hardware upgrades to this in order to continue to be competitive with other devices. I haven't seen a big number of rumors on what the Surface Laptop 4 would look like, but some of the rumors have revolved around switching to newer Ryzen chips. Now, 5th gen Ryzen is incredibly impressive. Microsoft notably opted for the Ryzen 3rd generation for the 15-inch model for the Surface Laptop 3, but unfortunately those didn't really outperform their Intel counterparts. So here's to hoping that Ryzen 5th generation will actually make that significant jump. I'm hoping with the Surface Laptop 4 that I'm able to get at least competitive experience in photo editing and maybe a little bit of video editing. I would love to get the opportunity to use a Surface Laptop 4 with a dedicated graphics card, maybe the 15-inch model, with a dedicated graphics card that would allow me to do more video editing and more advanced processing on it versus my M1 MacBook Air or other higher-end devices. The Microsoft Surface line has never really stood out for its performance. It's really stood out for how premium an experience that you're getting in a Windows laptop. And while I love that, other manufacturers, Windows manufacturers, are starting to make more compelling experiences to the point where I don't think Surfaces really stand out nearly as much as they used to in terms of quality and the overall experience. What do you think about the Surface Laptop 3, and what are you wishing for a Surface Laptop 4? Let me know down in the comments. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.